Alright, good afternoon grade 3-4s. We're going to do a virtual field trip with our guest Tamara Lindstrom. She is an environmental scientist and she is going to tell us about a couple different plants around Mewasin. Go for it.
Hey kids, even though we are in a provincial park and I'm showing you all the plants, I want to make sure that if you guys are going out, you're not picking the plants, especially in the park, because they are supposed to be for looking and touching, not picking, because our plants are alive and we want them to reproduce so that we have more plants for future generations to enjoy. Found in the boreal forest around Loon Lake is the lily of the valley. Lilies are cool plants because all lilies will have lines in their leaves that run in a circular shape almost around the center vine. Lily of the valley was typically used and ground up into a powder, then used in a tea to treat sore throats in the Cree culture. Down in the Mewasin area, you can often find different mosses that are this palish green color. And they are viney, they separate out. The common name for them is the deer moss. The fascinating thing about the deer moss is it takes 100 years to develop into a full form, and if you put pressure on it, that deer moss goes away. So you don't want to walk on moss like this. So when you're looking for a tasty snack and you're on a nature walk, you can look for the 3 little leaves that form out in a triangular shape with deep cuts, and they often will have this flower. This will come out into a little tiny berry, which you know as a strawberry. They will be less than the size of my pinky, but they are super sweet and super good treats when you're walking. The Cree used to use them to treat diarrhea, and they'd take the root and make it into a tea and drink it. So when looking for a rose to give your mother, you can look for a plant that has the 5 leaves, and they'll be in this shape. This one is the prickly rose because if you look at the stem, it's got large thorns, whereas a wild rose, the thorns will be smaller and a lot more condensed, and it almost has a soft feel rather than the hard prick. So these guys here are called a bedstraw. They will have a small berry that comes out of them, and they are part of the coffee family. So you can take that berry, dry it, and make it into a coffee that you can drink. So this is a bunchberry. It has the 2 big leaves that come off with 4 little leaves. This flower will actually turn into a bright red berry that used to be used to make puddings. This plant has been used to do anti-inflammatory, so they used to treat it as though it was an Advil or an aspirin. And they would drink a tea out of it or eat it as a snack. The berry was used for a dessert, but the rest of the plant was used as medication. This is Mrs. Pompu's favorite plant, the wood violet. When she was little, she used to pick them when she'd get off the school bus and bring them to Mrs. Lindstrom.
Okay, so this is the waterway between Goose Lake and Jumbo Lake. We're out at Mewasin on the bridge, so I know many of you have walked out here before.
Often in Canada you can find many of the plants that you may know as cattails. That is what they are. The cattails actually are one of the best purification systems for the water. As the water moves through their rooting system, it picks up all the bad stuff and it cleans it and lets only clean water go through. So with this being the entrance from Goose Lake to Jumbo Lake, it's actually taking any pollutants or bad things that might have come from Goose Lake, and it's cleaning them out, so the water that's coming from here is going in fairly clean into Jumbo. So from the last frame that Mrs. Lindstrom had for the video, you could see all the big cattails. Those were last year's cattails. This right here is a juvenile cattail, so it's just a baby. By fall it will grow up and it'll get the big big puff on top. And if you take your hand or heat up the puff, they explode. So this plant here is a tuft bulrush. It has flat edges, and you can see that there's florets. It's similar to a grass, but it is called a sedge. Yeah, that's that guy. So these flowers that are yellow with the big leaves are called a marsh marigold. They are actually poisonous to humans, so please do not eat them.
Come on.
Okay, so this little guy here with his pink leaves and his big fanning leaves besides his flower is a dwarf raspberry. They often disappear once they've turned into a berry as fast as they grew, because little mammals, like squirrels, like to come and get a nibble. They say that if you are lucky enough to have one, they are a great treat. This guy here is one of many different types of willows that we have in our wetland systems. This one, even though the leaves are very different, is also a type of willow. Even though this one looks extremely different as well, it is also a willow. So in amongst all these branches and stuff is something that looks like what your mom and dad might call fish eggs. This is actually duckweed. It is an aquatic plant that does a lot of cleaning. When you see duckweed, it actually means there's some nutrients in the water and that this is food for the fish and for the different insects that are in the water. Duckweed's good. Hey, yo!
Go ahead.
So this right here is a dandelion! When the dandelion first came to North America, it was brought over because it was beautiful and they could make certain adult drinks out of it and salads.
So it's not native to Canada?
No, that actually is a weed. It is... Mrs. Pompu asked, is it actually not native to Canada? No, it came over with the settlers when they came over because they wanted to bring a piece of home. That's why in the Alberta Weed Act, it is considered a nuisance weed.
Now if you want to do your yarrow, there's a whole bunch right here.
This is more strawberries. The little white flowers are strawberries.
Oh yeah. These plants here that have frilly leaves, they're very soft, are called the common yarrow. Often you will see them on your lawn and they will get about that tall and have a big white flower.
How tall?
They will get about that tall.
12 inches?
Yeah, about there.
Okay.
So this tree here is called a birch tree. The easiest way to tell that it's a birch tree is its leaves come into a very sharp point and it has big cuts in the leaf. The other ways to tell is the bark on it looks like it's peeling and has a papery effect. Do not peel the birch trees. It is not healthy for them. It's like peeling your skin. These guys are another type of lily. They are called the star-followed false salmon seal. You can tell that they are a type of lily, again, by the veins running parallel to the center. They have the cool flower that has a star shape and kind of looks like it's exploding, which is really great. So this plant here is your favorite snack. A blueberry plant. These are wild blueberries, so they're not as big as the ones your parents might get in the store, but they are still just as tasty, if not tastier. So this is a Saskatoon plant traditionally found across northern Canada. They used to take the berries, which would come from these flowers. They would dry them and then crush them into a powder and mix them in to make pemmican. So this tree here, this big guy, is called a jack pine. The jack pine likes to grow in soil that is sandy. So you know how people like to live either in the city or the country? Well, some trees prefer either sandy soil over a clay-based soil. So this guy likes to have sand because it doesn't have too much water and he feels happy in the sand. They have a really interesting cone, which I can show you in the next slide. So we showed you the big jack pine, but this one's a baby jack pine. So another fact about the jack pine is the seeds, which I had mentioned I'd show you. They often come in a curvature motion, like this, and when they pop open they look like this. You could see it slightly on that younger one when they look like this, but they will often end up being pointed. Jack pines like to reproduce when there is fire. They struggle to reproduce if there is not any fire. So fire can actually be a good thing in a forest. But do not set fires. Smokey the Bear still does not like that. Good?
Yes.
So these all in here are called hazelnut trees. They will get a small flower, which will turn into a seed that's kind of in this shape. And once they're ripened, they're good to eat. So these plants here are a leathery feeling, and beneath them they have dark brown dots. And that's how you can tell these are a bog cranberry, also known as a low bush cranberry. When the fruits ripen, the Crees would pick them, let them dry, grind them up, and use them in pemmican as well. So this is a horsetail. It grows in areas that are wetter, closer to lake shores. It's got individual little pieces that kind of stack up on each other. Often you'll find beside them later in the year, there'll be a little sprout that comes out and is a little swirl. And that's actually their seeds, is that little swirl. It's called a spore. And they are really awesome. They're just cool plants because they kind of look like a horse's tail. Like, yay! These are one of my favorite plants. They are called a Labrador tea. They are awesome because they have their leaves that come out. They have a leathery feel on top. But if you turn the leaf over, this orangey color is traditional use for this guy is that he was picked, dried, and then they used him in different teas. He was great for sore throats, different medical uses. The only thing is if you drink too much, it can cause a really bad tummy ache. So this is a pin cherry. They would collect the bark of the pin cherry and dry it and use it in different teas for sore eyes. It is not recommended to do that now. But you can tell that it's a pin cherry and not a choke cherry from the little bumps on the leaves. They look like pinheads. They're not sharp.
Can you try one in the sunshine? There you go. That's better.
Good. So this is a cow's parsnip. The Cree people would gather these, roast them over the fire, and their stalks get to about that big around. That big around. And then they cook them until they become loose, and they'll scrape out the innards and eat them. This is an as-like clover. It can commonly be found in your lawn and in different hay crops. It's great feed, very nutritious, but bad if it's cut too late in the year. This is an alpha plant. It is also used in hay crops. It is high nitrogen, so it adds back to the soils to help promote growth for the next years. Cattle really enjoy eating it, and it gets a nice purple flower when it's in bloom. So behind me, these big trees here that look like Christmas trees are called white spruce. How to tell them from an adult black spruce is these ones look like Christmas trees, where the black spruce kind of look like dead Christmas trees. So this is a caragana tree. It was brought over by the settlers when they first arrived in Canada, and it was used to make shelter belts around the homestead. It is fast growing. It does its job in creating shelter. The biggest problem is this plant is a weed in Canada. It does not belong here. It's an invasive species. If you look underneath there, everything else is struggling to grow. That's because the caragana is a good mother plant, and it makes the soil underneath great for more caraganas to grow, but not so great for other plants to grow. If you are to remove caragana, the best way to do that is to chop it down and then plant peas to neutral out the soil. So this tree here is called an aspen. And yes, people say you can tell that it is the way it is because of the way it is. But the real way you can tell is the leaves, if I can find one that's not eaten, is almost in the shape of an ace of spades, like an ace of cards. An ace of cards. How about a spade of?
Ace of spades.
Yeah.
A spade.
A spade, that's what I'm thinking of. And it's got not so sharp, but it's still got a little bit of fine teething in there on the edge of the leaf. This is a poplar tree. You can tell that it's a poplar tree because the length is a lot longer. It's not that same spadey shape, and the ridges on the leaf aren't as fine, they're more bulbed. So this tree here with the white flowers is a chokecherry. They will produce berries in about August that can make into some really good jams. How you can tell this is a chokecherry and not a pin cherry, even though their flowers are very similar and their bark looks very much the same, is their leaves have little points on them, like sharp teeth, rather than the bulbs that the pin cherry had.
Thanks grade 3-4 for joining me on our virtual field trip. Pop quiz, what did Tamara say was my favorite plant? If you said violet, you're correct, but she's actually wrong. My favorite plant is a lilac. So see you later, guys.